We have another great topic to review from the SYTAR conference. It's on embodiment and self-regulation. This was a presentation given by Catherine Cook-Cottone at the SYTAR conference, which stands for Symposium on Yoga Therapy and Research. It's the annual Yoga Therapists Association's conference that I attended in June of 2022, and I want to review the sessions I attended through the lens of children's mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. We have a program called Anxious to Awesome, and this is specifically for our certified facilitators. I also wanted to open up the conversation to other people who work with kids and want to look at a holistic approach to addressing mental and emotional health. And so I work as a yoga therapist as well, and I love going to the annual yoga therapy conference because of topics like this. So Catherine Cook-Cottone, she's a psychologist, she's a yoga therapist, she's a researcher, and she's a professor at University of Buffalo in New York. She's very well published. She's written 8 books and more than 85 research articles and chapters on embodiment, self-regulation, eating disorders, and trauma. So her talk specifically was about the work she's done and the research results that her and her colleagues have gotten through working with people with eating disorders. Very much about dysregulation and a lack of embodiment, and how yoga is a really wonderful holistic tool for that. And we want to look at that through the lens of working with kids with anxious feelings and other mental and emotional health needs. The whole premise of her work is based on a book that she referred to called The Hungry Self, and that our culture is about consumption, and looking for the solution to what ails us outside of ourselves, and how that leads to a whole host of disorders and imbalances, including eating disorders, and that the resolution of this is not just a reduction of symptoms, but a holistic perspective and a strong sense of self. So a sense of embodiment, a sense of being who you are within who you are, and that your body itself is a resource for you, which of course with someone with an eating disorder, it's almost the opposite situation. So she's done some fascinating work. I reviewed it again after attending it, and I'm like, I've got a couple hours worth of things to say from this 1-hour presentation, but I just wanted to pull out some of the highlights and give you some resources for further inquiry. I wanted to start by highlighting a couple of her books that I strongly recommend. One is called Mindfulness and Yoga for Self-Regulation, and I just picked this book up myself. It's intended as a primer for mental health professionals. So mindfulness is really being integrated more and more into mental health practices. And so regardless of what your particular work is, if you are a mental health professional or a school teacher or a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist, this book is going to really beautifully articulate what she highlighted in this 1-hour presentation. She also wrote a book called Mindfulness for Anxious Kids. So that's another great resource as well. And it's specifically on topic to what we're interested in doing and supporting children on the journey from anxious to awesome. What I loved about this talk is basically what she was talking about was developing your own internal compass. She didn't use those words, but that's what she's talking about. And that's the terminology we use on the journey from anxious to awesome, is developing your own internal compass and having that sense of embodiment and self-regulation. She started by talking about how external our culture is. Like, I'm happy if you're happy. And what do I need outside of myself, or what's going on outside of myself, and how we reference ourselves in relationship to that. So media consumption is a huge factor in this. So as we work to support children with mental and emotional health, we really need to address media consumption. Like, what are the images and ideas and references that they're getting, and how can we, modify that so that it's more supportive for giving them time to really discover who they are. That's a big idea, and it's a big part of the solution. And so the very nature of yoga is embodiment. Yoga is the integration of all aspects of yourself. It's a passionate inquiry into your own true nature. So the practice of yoga, when it's done in a holistic way, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is the perfect antidote to this external focus that's causing this mental health crisis that we're facing right now with our children. And so she talked about low level of emotional awareness and body awareness. There might be a heightened sensitivity to others' emotions, like very aware of other people's emotional states, but not as aware of their own emotional states. And I've certainly seen this with kids with anxious feelings, low levels of body awareness. And when the awareness of body is increased, then the anxiety reduces. And so she talked about that as well. She said something really beautiful that I wanted to quote. She says, every emotion has a signature heartbeat and a signature breath rate. And I'm aware of that emotions are correlate with a sensation in the body, but I didn't really think about how each and every emotion has its own signature heartbeat and breath rate. Like, that's really cool. And can we gain the sensitivity and the understanding and the patience to discover that for ourselves? Yoga is the groundwork to starting to identifying feelings, and start with something so basic like, can you feel your heartbeat? And you might have to physically put your hand on your chest and feel the heartbeat outside before you can actually experience it from the inside. Can you feel how and where your breath is moving? So this is the foundation to what's called interoception, awareness of internal states. Can you feel your heartbeat? Can you feel how your breath is moving? These are more obvious things that people are going to be able to detect first when they haven't spent much time inquiring within. And so when we're working with someone to begin with, that's a great place to start. Like, can you feel your heartbeat? If you can't feel it without touching your body, then touching your body and building from there. So this is positive embodiment, getting back into the body when our culture is constantly pulling us out of it. When fully embodied, we don't have this desperate need to consume. So really getting at the root cause of things rather than trying to manage symptoms. And this is a big part of the therapeutic applications of yoga. Yoga creates states of mindfulness and interoception. And she said this, and I absolutely love this. She said, with consistent practice over time, these states become traits. And I love that, right? And another thing it's important to consider is we're not trying to be calm all the time. You know, like, if I could just be calm. We don't want to be calm all the time because sometimes we're very excited or even scared. And this is the full spectrum of the human experience. What we want to be able to do is have enough room and enough self-understanding so that when we do have intense emotional states, we can handle them without losing it, is how she put it. And so to be able to have this self-understanding and self-regulation through self-understanding, through embodiment. She talked about the importance of waking up to the body as a resource. Specifically in regards to people with eating disorders, the body is a big problem. And to shift that relationship so the body is a place from which I can take a deep breath, and what a benefit that is. So I really loved how she talked about waking up to the body as a resource. The body's not just something that you drag around with you, but it's a wonderful tool and an aspect of who you are. A specific tool that she mentioned that we use a lot in our Anxious to Awesome programming is the body scan. We call it the meet and greet, and guiding someone to inquire specifically into each area of their body. What sensation are you aware of? What do you notice here? Oftentimes it's nothing or not much to start, but done consistently over time, you start to feel. I just worked with a group of kids yesterday, and the way they talked about their sensations and their emotions, like, what are the feelings inside your body? Well, I'm hungry. Well, how do you know you're hungry? What are the sensations? And they had to really think about it, and they said, oh, mine's gurgling, it makes a noise. And they started to be able to identify some actual feelings inside their body, but at first they just had the word hungry. They didn't have the understanding or the experience of the sensation until further inquiry, and then they were able to get this. She even mentioned getting out crayons and having people draw sensations on an outline of a body, which is something that we do very consistently in our Anxious to Awesome programming. In fact, it's really central. The body scan is a central component, and it's for this reason, to develop embodiment. So it was fun to hear her talk about that, getting out the crayons. It's like, we do that. Another highlight I wanted to pull out of this amazing presentation was teaching and environment. They did a study and showed, no surprise, that having mirrors in the room actually was harmful to people with eating disorders. And I would propose that it's also not a great situation for most people who are practicing yoga. It continues to reinforce that outward, like, what do you look like? How are things happening from the outside in? And we want to do the opposite of that. And so mirrors in a room where you're teaching is not ideal if you can avoid it. And also other images or just the environment, like what is it saying to that individual person? When you look at the most popular yoga magazines, those covers aren't very representative of the population of people who could benefit greatly from yoga. So to be aware of what kind of images and the setting that people see when they're coming to have an experience of yoga, when they're coming to learn about embodiment and self-regulation. And she talked about the importance of that for body image as well as identity and self-identity. She also talked about the relationship with the student and the teacher. It's about relationship and not form. Oftentimes, I'm a little hesitant to even use the word yoga, and I rarely call myself a yoga teacher because it immediately brings up these stereotypes we have in our culture where it is all about the form. It's about how you look. It's about getting into a specific shape and looking good in that shape. And that's the opposite of what we're doing. And so the relationship that we have with our students is what's really therapeutic and beneficial, not getting them into a certain form. And so we have to work against that stereotype because it's very prominent in the yoga culture. In Western culture, yoga has become very much about physical postures, and there's so much more to it. So we have to be aware of it and work, I don't want to say work against it, but work to realize that, am I doing that? Can I shift that? What's going on there? So some things about the relationship with the students and the environment that we're teaching in. She also talked about the importance of cueing. And this is funny because somebody mentioned this to me. Why do yoga teachers say the foot? And she said in her presentation, she said to use your foot, to say move your foot versus the foot or that foot is more embodying. So as we work to promote embodiment for people, facilitate that for people, to say your foot is more embodied than to say that foot or the foot. So just a little tweak we can make to promote what we're wanting to promote for our students. I loved when she brought up the opportunity to move in and out of comfort zones. So we call ourselves facilitators, and that's what we're doing. We're facilitating an experience where someone can move into discomfort and experience that and get comfortable with discomfort and also make empowered choices. Do you want to continue to experience this discomfort? Do you want to take it a little bit more deeply? Or do you want to back off? Is it time to rest? And so empowering people to make that choice about how much discomfort they can play with, they can experience, they can work with, and when it's time to take a rest. So again, it's not teacher driven, which a typical yoga class is. They'll actually use terminology like work harder and burn those calories and all this stuff that can be, it's definitely not trauma informed, so we want to give choices and also support our students in taking risks, in experiencing discomfort. She said great effort and great rest. So oftentimes, children with anxiety, they're not taking risks. They don't want to feel any discomfort. The discomfort in their body is so intolerable that they stop experiencing life. And that's what we've seen, and that's what we're working with. And so to offer opportunities to be with discomfort and be okay with discomfort and be like, I survived. And then a little bit more discomfort. We're not talking about pain. We're not talking about anything that's being forced from outside in. We're giving opportunities like, hey, are you open to experiencing this? And then giving them a room to process that. So yoga does expose emotional challenges and vulnerabilities. And this can be a good thing in a safe space with room to process. And I don't even want to use the term safe space because we can't guarantee safety. We've seen, shockingly, that we can't guarantee safety, but we can provide a brave space where you're a trusted person. There's predictability. There's a sense of comfort in exploring discomfort. And there, when these vulnerabilities come up, it's okay because there's a container. There's a brave space that we can provide for our students. Another huge factor that I've also seen that she mentioned in this presentation is that oftentimes somebody is identified with their disorder or their condition or their illness. And when that goes away, their sense of self also goes away. So I have seen people who aren't ready to give up the challenges they face because their experiences are so intertwined with that challenge. For example, some of their relationships are predicated on their illness or their condition. And if that illness or condition goes away, they lose those relationships. They lose access to certain things and they lose their identity. And so it's so important that we help our students develop a strong sense of self, a strong identity that's not tied to their illness or their condition or their symptoms, so that when they reduce those symptoms, when the illness is resolved, whatever it is, that their sense of self remains intact. Like, this is huge. And if it's not really considered or thought about, then you'll find, like, why is this person not working? Why are they not taking the steps that they need to take? And it may very likely be unrealized in the student as well. They might not be consciously aware that I don't want to stop being anxious, because then who am I? You know, the anxiety, and this is just an example of one of many conditions or illnesses, it might really be my thing. So true for teens and early teens. There's a very, very strong sense of group identity. It's really at its peak at this age range. So I've seen kids who are very, very strongly identified with kids who cut themselves, with kids who are attempting suicide, with kids who are all kinds of things, but that's their identity. It's not just about something. I'm not saying not just about, because it's a serious concern and there's many factors involved, and that one of them is, like, I identify with the group of people who do this kind of a thing, and if I stop doing this kind of thing, well, then who are my friends? Who are my people? So I've seen that with kids too. So just something to be aware of, how important it is to help develop a strong sense of self and personal identity that is regardless of your circumstances. And this, again, is totally yoga. If you want to really get into this in depth, I recommend studying the Bhagavad Gita. It's all about your purpose, your dharma. So why are you here? Who are you? It's better to do your own dharma, to fulfill your own purpose imperfectly, than to do someone else's perfectly. So what is my purpose? Why am I here? Those are huge questions that we want to help people discover as part of a holistic approach to well-being. Catherine Cook-Cottone said in her presentation, she said, practice your dysfunction or practice being you. And that's what we're working with. And also she talked about how we're working nervous system to nervous system. And I really like thinking about that. So it's about our own self-regulation as we work with someone else too, because our nervous system is having an influence on our students' nervous system and back and forth. So that relationship is there too. So to be aware of our own regulation when we're working with others. And then she shared some of her research results. And in general, she said, the results were better than expected. So that's great. She also mentioned that there's nothing in yoga, when practiced in this therapeutic way, not the kind of boot camp yoga physique way, there's nothing in it that contradicts in any way or counteracts in any way with any other kind of treatment or therapy. So it's a great adjunct. It's great to work with any other forms of therapy. There's nothing that would undermine another type of therapy. And I thought that was a great thing for her as a researcher who's been deep into this for decades to point out, to articulate, and that's based on her research. She also mentioned that as integrity goes up, symptoms go down, and this was part of their research as well. How honest were you today with yourself and with others, and how hard was that? That's a powerful inquiry that we can share with people that we're working with, especially in a one-on-one situation. When you're working with someone individually, how honest were you with yourself today? And how honest were you with others? And the more that we can be honest with ourselves and others, as integrity goes up, then our symptoms go down. And that makes sense. And that touches on the yamas and the niyamas, which are a wonderful tool from the yoga tradition to use to promote mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. The final nugget I want to share from this deep and rich session is the focus of treatment. So the focus of treatment from the Western approach goes from symptoms to a reduction in symptoms, and it stops there. And yoga therapy goes through the reduction of symptoms to eudaimonic well-being, which means happiness that comes through a sense of self-actualization. So again, we go back to dharma and purpose. Like, what is your purpose? Why are you here? and really having a strong sense of self. So even if there's no symptoms, there's still room to grow. There's still opportunity for an expanded sense of self and well-being. And so that's a wonderful opportunity to work with someone who necessarily doesn't have symptoms to the point where it's getting in the way of their quality life, but still wants to have a higher quality of life. And so eudaimonic well-being is that self-actualization. Like I have fulfilled my purpose for being here, which is incredible, right? And we're working kind of on a micro, like what's wrong today? Why won't these kids go to school today? How is anxiety getting in the way of their quality of life right now? To broadening it out to be who you came here to be. And I love working that way with kids because they're developing anyways. They're developing a career path. They're developing a lifestyle, in regards to the kind of family they may or may not have, and to be more aligned with their internal compass, with their sense of purpose and dharma, is going to support them for the rest of their lives. So they go from just trying to reduce anxious feelings to the point that they can get out the door and go to school to having a really quality life for the rest of their life. And that's the holistic approach from the yoga therapy tradition. So the goal is awareness and realization. And then the symptoms, whether they're there or not, become less relevant in your life. So someone can live a vibrant life of well-being with cancer. And so awareness and realization allows the experience to be a part of who you are instead of you being that experience. And that is what is so beautiful about the practice of yoga, when it's done in this holistic way and not just the physical postures and trying to do a handstand in the middle of the room, which is so much of what popular yoga in the West today can be like. This was one of my favorite talks because Catherine Cook-Cottone is a really sweet and beautiful person. You can see the therapeutic relationship that she would have with her clients or her students, and the amount of research she's done has been such a wonderful contribution to the work that we can do. So again, I highly recommend this book she's written. She's got several articles and other books as well. So I'll share some links in the description below. And I would love to hear from you if we can have this conversation and talk about ways that we can support each other and supporting children and living a life of well-being. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and look out for a few more videos of these reviews that I'll be doing from SYTAR 2022.